I was on the phone with RFK Jr. when he lost his mind. My friend's brain decayed right in front of my eyes. I'm Greg Palast. I'm an investigative journalist with the Thom Hartmann Report and a columnist with Raw Story. Now this is painful. This is horrible and feels a little bit like betrayal, but I have no choice. Bobby Kennedy Jr. was my friend and co-author. We wrote stories together for Rolling Stone. Bobby introduced my best-selling books. And he even wrote a chapter for Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, one of my books. And with Jesse Jackson, we co-authored the #1 selling adult single-issue comic book of all time, Steal Back Your Vote. But then Bobby lost his mind. It was truly scary. In 2012, Bobby had arranged a press conference about the Deepwater Horizon explosion. If you remember, 11 oil rig workers were incinerated in the blowout of a British petroleum drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. My team of investigators discovered that 17 months before that oil rig blew out in the Gulf, British Petroleum suffered an identical blowout in the Caspian Sea. The oil company, with the connivance of then Secretary of State Condi Rice, covered it up. It was a hell of a story, which I broadcast on prime time in Britain and in Europe. I wrote a book about it, Vulture's Picnic, and now here's where Bobby comes in. And it gets weird. On the second anniversary of the blowout, Bobby, who was a professor of environmental law, arranged for a major press conference to expose this story of BP's blood-encrusted perfidy. But then Bobby canceled the press conference, saying he'd heard the story had been told previously. Well, yes, it had, Bobby. You told it. Bobby, I was on the radio with you for an hour discussing this story, the blowout's cover-up. Bobby, you had a national radio and TV show. Do you remember? Ring of Fire? You reviewed my book about the story. And strangest of all, Bobby, was on my Democracy Now! Report. You joined me. You told the story. And now you say you'd heard the story somewhere else. Yes, it was from you. That Bobby had forgotten all these things was frightening. As if Leonardo DiCaprio had forgotten he was in a film about the Titanic. One of our investigators was listening in to me and Bobby, and she began making frantic cut-off gestures to end a call with him. End it now. Something's wrong with him, or he's just a jerk. I don't know, but something's really wrong, and you don't want your reputation destroyed by standing next to him when he goes wrong in public. Yeah. Promise me we'll never work with him again. I think he's dangerous, I really do. This was difficult for her to say, as she never got over being a bit, starstruck in his presence. Look, she said, I'm just a kid from nowhere, and I got to tell my dad I just had dinner with a Kennedy. But she insisted, stay away from him. He's become untrustworthy. He's getting crazier and crazier. This was not the first incident. Bobby was a strong guy in his late 50s, talking like a 92-year-old in a nursing home trying to remember his first date. Since then, we found out that Bobby had a worm in his brain, a real, live, physical critter that somehow got inside his skull. Now, I'm not sure about the connection between his crazy and the worm, because I'm not a brain surgeon and I don't speak worm. But that year, 2012, his wife, Mary Kennedy, after making a call to him, hung herself. Hey, that could mess with anyone's head. But in this case, the New York tabloids were blaming her suicide on Bobby. A cruel, and it was an unjustified attack that had to make it even, a heavier burden psychologically. Now, what I liked about Bobby, and I think Bobby liked about me, was that we were always skeptical of the official stories. After all, his own dad famously admitted to making up a cockamamie lie about Vietnam to waltz us into that war. Bobby and I bonded over rejecting the bullshit from the government and its servile punditocracy. But there was a big difference between us. He thought every official story was bullshit, but I needed to see the bull. I was and remain a big-time believer as an investigative journalist, and show me the facts. But facts didn't seem to get in the way of Bobby's attraction to plain wacko conspiracy theories. Here's an example. We co-authored articles for Rolling Stone about racial vote suppression. In my book, Armed Madhouse, my chapter, Carry One, describes the physical evidence of ballots disqualified. Enough rejection of black voters' ballots in Ohio that effectively re-elected George W. Bush. This is hard evidence. But Bobby jumped into an evidence-free crazy world in a cringeworthy article for Rolling Stone speculating about voting machines that magically switched Kerry votes to Bush. Now, I checked these stories to a fare thee well. Nothing to them. Bobby mistook the potential to cheat with actual evidence, like the potential of a vaccine to harm you, but no evidence. I bit my tongue then and said nothing. And I'm sorry for that, because later his knee-jerk reaction against COVID vaccines was a result of the attack on his reasoned questions raised in the film Vaxxed about MMR vaccines, which were laced with mercury. The film successfully got Big Pharma to remove the mercury. Thanks, Bobby. But Bobby, after having been savaged by the pharmaceutical industry, now became Mr. Anti-Vax, opposing anything injected by a needle, except it appears steroids to build muscles. Come on. Sorry, I'm no fan of Big Pharma, but I need proof before I tell people not to wear a mask during a pandemic. I need the proof. And his only proof was that Big Pharma and the FDA are liars. Yeah, they are. Still, that's not proof. It was heartbreaking at times to hear Bobby more and more refer to his father as Daddy, just like a little boy of 14 years, which was his age when his father was shot dead. I'm told by psychologists that people often use phrasings of their childhood frozen on the day of a trauma. And in this case, whoa, that's more than understandable. It did creep me out that he thought Daddy was watching his every action and could still reward or punish him like a parent. But like I say, who can forgive that? And that led him into his first dive into the world of weird. His father was murdered by Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian who assassinated Bobby Sr. because RFK was a vociferous militant supporter of Israel. Sirhan committed the killing on television. The murder is right there on camera. Yet Bobby Jr. could not believe his own eyes and that of a million horrified witnesses. To this day, he insists Sirhan did not kill his dad. Maybe it's some kind of denial mechanism, having to watch your own father's head blown apart. I don't know. I'm a scribbler, not a shrink. Well, now it gets weirder. Bobby recently said Hamas must be destroyed. Palestinians are the most pampered people in the world. He opposes a ceasefire in Gaza and is channeling his father's rage that Arab nations are trying to bring back the Holocaust. Now, is this a sincere view or an attempt to finally confront the killers who celebrated the murder of his father? Like I said, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy concerned that my friend's imbalance chose our president. The last time I heard from Bobby, it was after midnight on Election Day in 2016. Greg, what happened? When my plane left JFK, I don't know if I'm doing good, Bobby, Hillary had won. I've landed in LA and Trump won. What happened? What happened, Bobby? We wrote a book about it. I had reissued an updated version of my book, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which included his intro and chapter he'd written. The book, which was on the Times bestseller list, detailed exactly how Trump would take the election from Hillary through vote suppression trickery in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Did he forget his own book? I admit I feel terrible about revealing these things. But our democracy is truly in balance. Bobby dropped out of the race in favor of Trump. Was that decision made by a brilliant environmental law professor? Or was it the worm? This is Greg Palast reporting.